I went home that day, I remember before work, and I just completely rewrote the test correctly. Just for more
Mm.
practice, and eventually that practice became my general study method. And eventually he did let me retake it. I aced
Mhm.
it, and then from that point on, it was pretty much constant repetition.
Welcome to the Kaizen Blueprint podcast, where we explore topics for continuous personal growth and improvement.
David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Aldo. Really appreciate
Now,
it.
I took you in this episode because of your language learning skills, but before we start getting into that, tell us all the languages that you speak,
Okay.
whether that's and fluently, intermediate, maybe conversationalist, the whole nine yards.
All right, all right. So let's see. At Abington, I had the privilege of studying German since we were in class together. Studied French, studied Italian, studied Chinese, Japanese, and some Arabic. But please don't make me start speaking all of them right now. I mean, some of them I retained a lot better than others. But I would definitely say I'd be comfortable talking to you in German, French, or Italian right now.
Got it. And why did you start learning these languages? What made you interested in those?
I would say that was because of our amazing German professor that I was not expecting to meet. It was a complete, just wonderful gift in life to have met Dr. Colucci, and who told me that, you know what, David, go try it. It'll help you out in your language learning, help you out in just life in general. It'll give you the whole new way of thinking. And I said, okay, let's do it. And that's exactly what happened.
Got it. And when we first met, I had 1 year of German.
Mhm,
Well, I studied in Germany. I did an exchange program in
mhm.
Germany, and basically, I had that opportunity to immerse myself in the German language, the German culture. And when I came back, everything was so easy. I don't remember what class that we took. It was like German 2 or German
Two,
3, but
two, I remember.
yeah, it was one of the more advanced one. But
Mhm.
then you were up there too. So you had a German kind of background studying.
Correct. In my high school, I took about 2 years of German there,
Hmm.
but it wasn't on the same caliber as to what we were being taught. So I actually had to do at the very beginning a little bit of catch up because I was missing
Mm.
so much. But you just got to put the effort in, and you get the rewards.
So why German in high school?
In high school, I was just looking for something a little bit more challenging than Spanish or French for that matter at the time. And I said, you know what, let's try German. It's difficult, but I told myself, isn't my high school already offered Japanese, and I figured, you know what, I'm doing the challenging stuff already. Let's make it more challenging.
Mm.
And so yeah, I tried German in high school. Had a great first German teacher. Second one, I'm sorry, but not the same caliber. And then of course Dr. Colucci, who was like, way up there.
Yeah, yeah. No, he was very knowledgeable,
Oh, absolutely.
and what got him into telling you to learn more languages other than German? Was it the skill set that you had, or?
I think it was just my general like willingness to do it because I will tell you this, when I first came into his class, we had our first test, and you remember how rigorous his
Hmm.
easy 10-page tests were.
Hmm.
And and all of a sudden I got like a horrible grade on it. And I was just like, what? It
Hmm.
completely shook me. So I just asked him, like, hey, what's the correct answer here? What did I do incorrectly here? How can I learn from this? How can I redo this?
Mm.
And then he gave me that chance, which was not something that every professor would give you, because I'm sure, in college or anything in life, if you make that kind of mistake, you're not getting a second chance.
Mm.
He could have easily said, sorry, better luck next time. But no, he said, okay, here's what you did wrong.
Mm.
Explain it to me. And then I went home that day, I remember before work, and I just completely rewrote the test correctly. Just for more
Mm.
practice, and eventually that practice became my general study method. And eventually he did let me retake it. I aced
Hmm.
it, and then from that point on, it was pretty much constant repetition.
Got it. And what made you start learning other languages after then?
After then, he was just talking to me, and he told me that because he grew up in part of Italy where they speak German is the first language, that having two different languages actually helps your thinking more.
Mm.
It provides you with new avenues of interpreting things and of analyzing things.
Mm.
And to me, that was very, very insightful because as the more German I picked up, and of course, I know English and German are both Germanic languages, but it's still a different perception of how you think of things because English has a lot of French influence, has a lot of Latin influence, and a few Greek words here and there.
Got it.
So the whole different aspect in how to analyze things, how to get to a solution, but through different angles and avenues, really just made it more interesting to me. And I said, hey, I need more of this. So Italian, French, continuing Japanese, more Chinese, Arabic, even Spanish. Actually, forgot about that. And I was just like, you know what? This is actually so helpful because like it's a completely new way of interpreting the same information,
Mm.
but in a different way.
Got it. Tell us more about how you start learning one language after the next and what made you kind of where's that cutoff point where you're like, okay, I think I've studied enough. For example, I think you said Italian after, or is it French?
I'd say Italian would be my most conversational language.
Okay.
French, I've actually have used in a professional environment before, and German, I've also.
Really? Okay.
Actually, yes, at Lowe's, believe it or not, of all places.
Okay, so you did German and you went Italian, right? Or French?
Oh, when I was actually even taking German back with Colucci, I was taking Chinese and Japanese as well at the same time. So I was already doing it then.
Mm,
So it was just really greasing the gears and getting everything going. And then suddenly I'm like, you know what? I want my extra four credit hours. Let's do French 100. Let's do Italian. Let's, do all that.
and what is your methodology of learning these languages?
It's more so of interest to me because one thing is that Colucci also mentions that when you learn a language, you're learning entirely not just a new thought process, but you're learning the whole culture, a whole history, a whole literature as well. And that's really exciting because again, there are so many great works that are written in that we have to read translated into English.
Mm.
Not that English has amazing literature, do not get me wrong, but it's again, as you know, reading Goethe in German
Oh yeah,
than in
that's
English,
difficult.
night and day. But again, but night and day difference, no?
Yep.
And same thing with French or Italian, and even of course Chinese and Japanese and other languages too.
Got it. So walk us through the first step into learning a language. How does that work? What
Well,
do you read a book first or do you get motivated first? What is the somewhat methodology of learning a language?
that's a good one because that's really depends on the people. Like the traditional approach,
Mm.
like when you're in a school, is okay, we're gonna do the alphabet today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's of course for languages that have an alphabet. Some languages, like for example Chinese, do not have an alphabet. You kind of just need to get thrown off into the deep end and say, here you go, learn all
Yes.
these characters.
Yep.
And for example, for Arabic that has an alphabet that we don't use, you need to essentially sit down and say, okay, memorize drawing all these characters that
Yep.
are the alphabet.
Yep.
Basically, for non-Latin languages, you need to kind of just go a little bit off in the deep end. Chinese is an extreme, of course, but essentially learn the alphabet. That's the first. That's like the most traditional, basic step. However, I understand that people learn languages not in the traditional means in a classroom. For
Mm-hmm.
some people, it's just simply conversational. Like, oh, you have a coworker who just speaks Spanish, for example, which
Mm.
is very common, and you'll just pick up phrases from them and you'll use them, but you won't use them grammatically correct if you know what I mean. Like you'll
Mm.
speak like improperly.
Mm.
Not that there's anything wrong with that because the point gets still communicated, but it's not the traditional thing that you and I encountered.
Well, that's when the connection thing comes
Hmm.
comes into, right? You start picking up certain languages, or not certain languages, but certain words and
Hmm.
certain letters, and then you combine them into one, and that's when you start connecting
Exactly.
to to each word, and then it
Hmm.
creates a whole sentence.
Yep. Yep. It's a very beautiful process. Like I was very happy. Like I had a coworker at one of my jobs who spoke, I think, 3 words of English, and I picked up enough Spanish from just hearing her say things that I was able to communicate with her. I'm like, oh, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
This is great actually. And it was kind of like a little breakthrough moment, but I'm like, okay, I don't need to do Spanish professionally now. I just need to just enough to communicate. Again, like you need to have goals when you're also learning a language too, which I think is really important.
Mm.
Like, and I'm sorry, I'll go off here a little bit.
It's okay.
But everyone's just like, oh, I want to be fluent in, for example, French, for example. But what do you mean by fluent? Do you
Mm.
mean like fluent enough to go attend university? Do you mean fluent enough to order at a restaurant? Do you mean fluent enough to go, talk to people, at a bookstore or in school maybe? Like, what do you mean by fluent? I think that's what you need to establish. Like, what are your goals for learning a language? It's just like with you running. It's like, if you want to go run a whole marathon, you're not going to do the whole thing the first day, right?
Yep.
You're going to run a mile, 2 miles. You get the idea. Build up, a lot of build up. And I think once you establish your goals of, hey, I want to learn this language to this point that I'm comfortable with, that's like the great first step right there.
Got it. And I think that goal aspect is very important. I remember I took Spanish during my high school years,
Mhm.
and I think the goal was to just get a good grade.
Correct.
And because of that, I just want to do the bare minimum
Mhm.
and get that 100 and be done with it.
Yep.
And I remember when I went to Mexico for the first time, I
Mhm.
took an 8-week course of learning Spanish because
Mhm.
I know that when we're there, we weren't going to go to just the tourist area like the
Oh
Tulum and
yeah.
Cancun, but
Mhm.
we were driving to other cities where it's just Spanish people that don't speak a word of English.
Mhm.
So obviously, in those aspects, I need to learn Spanish. But I've learned so much in that 8-week course that prepared me into going into Mexico.
Mhm.
And then I was like, oh, this is actually working. And then you start
Mhm.
immersing yourself into the world, and eventually you learn everything, and then oh, well, not everything, but you learn just enough, and you learn more than the 2 years that I went to high
Of
school.
course,
Did
absolutely.
you have that same experience when you first
For
s-
immersion,
when you first studied in school, and did that help a ton versus whatever other methodology you do on the side as well?
so regarding immersion, it's depends on how you want to immerse yourself. For example, like the best way to do it, of course, is to go to a country where your target language is spoken, and just live there or immerse yourself there. Maybe attend an accelerated learning program if you really want to master the language, and that would be the most like best way.
Mm-hmm.
For me, though, I remember our German professor told me that hey, there's a school in Vermont called Middlebury. They offer German immersion programs,
Mm.
and he said I think it'd be great for you to go because he was willing to do a whole German program with me right at Abington, and
Wow.
I really I wish, but you know what happened, fortunately. And then so I went there one summer. It was fantastic, and I feel like every single thing that I've learned prior to that, because Middlebury has a very famous rule. It's like, hey, no more English after this date. Nothing. We ask you to, even for text
Wow.
messages, even for your entertainment, please stick to your target language, which wasn't really a problem. I set all my video. I have Steam. So I
Hmm.
took all my games to German. So I'm like, oh yeah, so it's like nothing super new. And I knew that the shows that I liked, for example, could have German subtitles and German dubs, so it wasn't that big of a difference.
Yeah.
Even creating a German playlist, so wasn't too bad.
Wow.
Wasn't too bad. Wasn't too
That's
bad.
true immersion there.
It was, yeah, because all we were doing, we were just talking German the whole time.
Mm.
Like it wasn't, hey, how you doing? It was like Guten Morgen, wie geht's, and that's all you heard.
Wow.
Even in the classroom, there were like one or two places where we could speak English. For example, like the university bookstore, because the people who work there, they don't speak the dozens of languages the school offers.
Mm.
So that was the one place where it was okay.
So Middlebury is it a language school?
It's a university,
Is it a
yes, but
university?
they pride their kind of their forte is in foreign languages. So
Wow.
when I came back, I was very excited, and I was talking to Kaluchi because for him it was very easy to talk in German. For me, it was like, hold on now, one second, let me get the dictionary. But towards the end, I found myself like much more comfortable in German, and even using more, of course, not the most complex words, but like more rudimentary words to kind of get the point across. And he was very happy about it. Then eventually, I stopped hearing about him from 2 weeks. I'm like, maybe he's busy.
Mm.
Eventually, I come back to say, hey, we're sorry, he passed away. I'm just like, oh, there
Wow.
goes our German professor.
Well, at least he had an impact on your life.
100% he did. Absolutely, definitely for the better.
Yeah, yeah. Well, going back to the goal aspect,
Mhm.
what is for someone who's starting out that might not know what their goal is, but they are motivated to learn a certain language, what are the common goals that you see that could be effective for other people?
I would say the first goal is to kind of break the ice, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need to make that, and this is really critical here. You got to make that first mistake.
Mm.
I know everybody doesn't want like, oh well, I'm a perfectionist. I can't do anything wrong. No, no, no. With language learning, you have to,
Mm.
because like you will make a mistake eventually.
Like everything in life.
Exactly, of course, and you got to learn from that. You have to have that learning experience. Like it's not always gonna be perfect, and a lot of people I feel like struggle because they're like afraid to talk. I'm sure you remember back in high school, like
Yep.
there are kids like afraid to talk. They don't want to mess up, and which again I understand completely, but you kind of have to because you're not gonna learn otherwise.
Yeah.
And so that's one. That's step one, in my opinion. Step two is then getting whatever you deem the basics down. If you're learning, like, not in the conventional way, unconventionally, like, watching TV or watching movies or music or coworkers who speak a different language than you kind of need to establish a baseline. You kind of sound a baseline of what you want to learn with them, or what phrases need to be known,
Mm-hmm.
or what alphabets need to be studied.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can introduce more advanced vocabulary, then conversational, then practice writing, reading. You get the idea.
So what is the conventional and conventional? Tell us more the difference between those two
Sure.
aspects.
So conventional would be like, for example, like, going to school, taking a language course, language learning seminar, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of learning, oh, here's the alphabet. We're going to learn days of the week. We're going to do numbers now. We're going to do, colors. We're going to do countries. We're going to do basic geography, facts about the little country. That's, I'd say, was more conventional, but the way we were taught in school.
Mm-hmm.
Unconventional, in my opinion, which can also be just as effective, is, hey, I have a coworker who only speaks French. This might be applicable somewhere in Canada, for example, and they only speak French. They don't speak a lick of English. So you got to learn French, speak the basics with them, say bonjour, say comment ça va. At least you get that thing going.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you can't understand exactly verbatim what they're saying, you need to. The more you hear from them, the better.
Mm.
Now, of course, let's say you want to develop this further, but you don't want to have time to go to school or you have other life issues, but you really want to perfect this. Then this is where I think media involvement comes really in handy because the internet is a huge place. Everything's
Sure.
on there. I'm sure you can find your favorite TV show dubbed in the language that you want to learn. I mean, Disney Plus has it in pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So you
So
can
it's
definitely,
Netflix.
exactly. So you can definitely watch the classics or things that you like in your target language, be it French, Italian, whatever. And then, because here's the thing, let's like pick something you really like. Let's say, for example, Simpsons. People like really like the Simpsons. They kind of get the gist of what's going on there. If you just switch it to French, you'll kind of already get what's going on. Then you say, "Oh wait, that's a new word right there. I don't recognize that. Let me write that down." Boom. Then you're learning that way.
But when you're learning that way, that's difficult for someone who's just
Correct.
learning the language because that's not just one or two words, that's an entire sentence and each word of the sentence. And it
Correct.
can make convoluted and confusing.
Yes, it can be. Hey, wasn't gonna, who said it? Nobody said it was gonna be easy, of course. But you're right. That's a very good point, actually. And to the point where, like, sometimes, like, when I was getting more comfortable with German, I'd still have the English subtitles on because then I could match with what they're saying to the English, which was a little bit of an extra step. But when I was like, wait, what's that word right there? Rewind.
Mm.
Go 10 seconds back,
Hmm.
and eventually pick it up. Like, oh, that's the word right there. That's, for example, the word for elephant. So, example. But then you pick it up
Got it.
there.
Do you think extroverts have better advantages when it comes to learning a language?
I wouldn't say necessarily. I mean, I would say extroverted people are much more able to kind of break the ice, so to speak, and do the more talking and learn that way. But not necessarily. The thing about each language is difficult in its own way, and it
Mm.
offers its own challenges.
Hmm.
For example, everybody says, "Oh, well, Spanish is so easy. It's the most commonly spoken language in the U.S. aside from English." Yeah, that's true. But Spanish has so many dialects.
That's true,
Not
along with
every
many other languages.
Not everyone just speaks Mexican Spanish, and even of course Mexico has its own dialects within the country. For example, like if you really want to learn Spanish, then somebody from the Caribbean, from say Puerto Rico or Cuba or Dominican Republic, their Spanish is going to be very different than what we're learning in school.
Right.
So that's another challenging too. So, in somebody, for example, very introverted who says, "Hey, you know what? I'm not too comfortable talking, but I really like learning all this new vocab and these new ways of saying the same words that I'm learning in school." They could excel there, absolutely.
Hmm.
That's still, and of course, speaking and having knowledge of these, dialectal words for a different region or regionalisms, whatever you want to call them, they're both equally valuable in my opinion.
Hmm.
Of course, speaking is always preferred, but having regional dialects, like for example, like if you and I say go to Germany, I don't speak Austrian German, do you?
No.
Exactly. So again, we'll be a little bit clueless. If I say somebody else, for example, in our class who really studied Austrian German, they'll be right at home.
Yeah.
So to each their own.
Got it. So after finding out what the goal is,
Mhm.
right? That's number one. And number two, what is the next step there?
The next step would be getting some kind of baseline, be it the alphabet, basic phrases, hello, how are you? I'm
Hmm.
doing great. What about yourself? Those kind of things. Then you start adding more complex vocabulary.
Mm.
Not when I say complex, I don't mean like, oh, let's write a whole, Encyclopedia Britannica. No, no, no. I mean just like I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. What are you doing later today? You got to build the conversation. You got to kind of keep it like how would you talk in English basically?
Mm.
Or your whatever your native language is, and then go from there and say, hey, how would I continue this conversation?
Mm.
Like think about like the conversations you have, for example, like professional, family, friends, and kind of continue those conversations, but in your target language.
Got it.
And to me, I think that's the next step as well of kind of retaining the language as well. Like, what's applicable to you? Because what's in the textbook, for example, could be completely irrelevant to what you or I mean. Do you remember we had examples from the 1980s,
Yep.
so it wasn't exactly that modern, but um, then I just changed. I'm like, hey, instead of listening to the cassette, I'm playing Xbox. You know what I mean? Like you're
Mm.
making it more relevant to yourself, and that way, you're, in my opinion, you're retaining a lot more.
Got it. So after retaining a lot more and understanding
Mhm,
the basic key phrases,
mhm.
by then should we start writing down the things
Oh,
or
absolutely.
is it better in a conversational setting and having a conversation with people or it's a little bit of both?
I would say it would have to be a healthy mix of both
Mm.
because writing is also an essential component of any language, and having that component along with speaking is really helpful and will basically maximize your retention of the language. So
Got it.
even like jotting down like basic phrases like what you did. I remember very often, for example, in my Japanese classes, we'd have to write down what we did that day
Mm.
prior. So I got like Japanese. I remember was at my last period, so she would just expect us a little writing quiz. How was your day? But everything had to be in Japanese, of course.
Did you have to write them in the
Oh yeah,
Japanese characters
oh yeah,
too?
of course.
Wow.
Well, whatever characters we knew at the time. She didn't expect,
Mm.
of course, complete fluency, but just give me a basics. Give me a little rundown.
How do you stay motivated in all these languages then?
Well, I'm only human, I'm not going to say that every day I do an hour a day. Again, it's only 24 hours in a day,
Sure.
and it's little bits here and there. It's like, hey, I really want to keep studying. It's like it's something I just really love. It's not something that I think about. Oh, I have to do this. It's more of like, hey, I need to find time for this because I just love it so much. And it can be in a variety of mediums. For me, for example, it could be sometimes I just turn on my German playlist, and to me that counts as just interacting with German. Or I'll just watch the news in German. Or I'll open up Instagram and say, hey, I can look up French newspapers right here that
Mm.
have pictures that have. And if I'm really struggling, I can just hit C translation if I'm really struggling. But
Hmm.
again, just any kind of interaction, or if I on my days off, for example, like today, I'll bust out my workbook and do just a little bit. It's
Wow.
just something that you just really, if you really love something, you're not going to say find time. You're not finding excuses. You're going to say, hey, I can do this today, and I'm going to love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the difference between people who do stuff
Mhm.
and people who just do stuff for the passion of it.
Mhm.
It's like your job, right?
Yeah,
If you find something that you really enjoy, you're just getting paid on the things that you really enjoy. And I think
exactly.
in terms of the language aspect, like you really love learning languages,
Mhm.
and because of that, you completely immerse yourself in the content that you're watching, the
Mhm.
things that you're reading, and it's just things that you do on your free time. And I think for the viewers, right, it is important to find that thing that you really enjoy the most
Mhm.
and immerse yourself completely, because I like the phrase, like it's, you are in the sum of the five people that you surround yourself with,
Mhm.
but I think that sixth person could be the things that you immerse yourself. If you
Absolutely.
go on YouTube, what are the algorithm telling you to watch? And that is basically based on your history, right? So I think for you in the language learning space, you probably go on YouTube and search up key phrases in a certain language, or perhaps what are the culture differences between one language to the other, or one culture
Absolutely.
or tradition. So I think because of that, you completely immerse yourself, and it's just on a daily basis that you learn these things.
Oh yeah. Actually, you're right. Like if I open up my YouTube, for example, it'll jump straight to shorts or whatever they're
Mhm.
called. And it'll tell me, oh, here's how people in Berlin say this, and haha, here's how people in Saxony say this, and here's how people in,
Yeah.
Bavaria say this. And I'm like, yeah, this is all really cool though, because like this is actually stuff I like.
Hmm.
Now I know how, for example, like if I go there, I shouldn't say, for example, this specific phrase that people in Berlin use versus people that in Bavaria will be like, start raising eyebrows. Like we have the same thing in English, even the United States, of course. Like of course, like if you walk into Boston, you say y'all, how are y'all doing today? They're gonna be like, what'd you talk about?
Who is that?
Exactly. Like it'll be like immediate like eyebrow raises. But yeah, essentially, if you just really going back to if you really love something, you'll just put yourself into it, and nothing will stop you, basically.
Got it. I forgot to ask you in this
Oh sure.
in the first few minutes,
Hmm.
but the most important thing is, did you learn all the bad words before you learn hello, how are you, and all the language did you learn?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, dude. Yes, absolutely. Because here's the thing, like, it's such an important.
It's
Unfortunately,
important to learn the bad words.
yes, because just in case like somebody says something, you know what I mean? And yeah, but I feel like some languages have a lot more complexity in their vulgarity.
Hmm.
Talk about it professionally at least, to the point where it's like, for example, in Russian, which is my parents' native language,
Sure.
they can get very creative, and I'm just like, huh, what? And other languages have such sheer dialectal differences. For example, in the case of Spanish,
Yeah.
that not necessarily you say one thing bad, they'd be like, that's okay. Why'd you say that perfectly normal word to me?
Mm.
But of course, context will tell you otherwise.
Is it true that in the Russian language there's actually a dictionary full of the bad words?
Oh, I would not know you. But yeah, going back to particularly even in German, German can get very colorful with its swearing. I
Sure.
will admit.
Yes.
French, from what I've experienced, is a little bit mild compared to like English. Well, French and English have a lot in common.
Hmm.
And as for Chinese, it just depends on because China has how much regionalism, and like each province of China has its own dialect nearly or language, depending on who you ask.
Hmm.
Um, it just depends on context. Like in one region, this word is okay.
Really?
However, for example, the word 小姐, which is supposed to mean miss. However, in another part of China, 小姐 has a completely different meaning. That's not something you should call a woman. You can
Wow.
kind of get where I'm
Yep.
going with this.
Yep.
And to me, I was just like, oh, that's really important to know that. Okay, use this part in northern China and do not say that these combinations in southern China. For
Hmm.
just as an example.
Got it.
Yep.
Now, I would say list all the now that you went through all the languages about the vulgarity of it. Now, tell us based on the language that you know so far, what are
Mhm.
the I guess start from the easiest to the hardest.
Hmm. Well, here's the thing. This is gonna be different for everyone
Sure.
because every single person has a different background. English might not be their first language. They might speak a completely different language, and of course, some of your viewers might say, "Hey, well, that one's very easy for me because X, Y, Z."
Mm-hmm.
So again, just my personal experience, but I'll go hardest to easy. If that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So I would say Chinese, just right off the bat, is one of the most difficult languages I've had the pleasure of studying. Not that I hated it; I absolutely loved every second of it, minus my hand hurting from writing all the characters. But it was a pleasure to study it and to really dive into its intricacies. And of course, the nice thing about Chinese is that it actually has two faces. What I mean by that is
Mm.
that it has a traditional Chinese that's used in mainland China. Then it has traditional Chinese, which is the very complicated old style Chinese characters that look very beautiful writing them, but physically writing them is like hurts.
Really?
Well, they're very complicated. The average simplified Chinese character has about, I believe, 6 to 7 strokes,
Mm-hmm.
versus traditional can have anywhere between 10 and 14.
Got it.
And they have the same meaning too. So traditional Chinese, for example, like you and I go to Philly's Chinatown,
Yes.
you will see traditional Chinese everywhere. For example, also in Japanese, the kanji system that they use
Yep.
is also traditional Chinese. Same thing in Korean with, I believe it's called Hanja, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And in Vietnamese as well, prior to the French arriving, they also wrote in traditional Chinese. So you will see it very often. And in my opinion, it's very important to study it, study both actually. But um, it's just another kind of, it's a joy of the language, as difficult as some people might find that.
Got it.
And then I'd say we have Arabic.
Arabic.
I thoroughly enjoyed studying Arabic. I felt like I was getting the grasp of it just from a semester's point of view. But I loved it. I wish I could have continued it. But the difficulty of Arabic is that the language stretches from Iraq to Morocco
Mm-hmm.
with tons of variety in between.
In terms of dialects or
Oh,
just
completely dialects. Yes. For example, like Iraqi Arabic and versus Moroccan Arabic, it might be very difficult for them to understand each other actually,
mm,
even in a very simple conversation. And I saw this because the Arabic professor we had at Abington, she was a Moroccan woman. And however, she said, "I'm speaking to you all in Egyptian because this is how most Arab media is portrayed, something that everyone can understand."
got it.
However, they asked her out of curiosity, "Please switch to your native dialect," and she did.
Mm,
They were clueless,
mm,
and I was asking her, like, "Hey, would it just be easier if I start speaking French right now?" She said, "Yeah, probably."
yeah, got it. So what's the next language?
I would say, let's see, German does have its difficulties. Do not get me wrong. I mean, it really, really does have its difficulties, as you and I both
Yeah,
remember.
yeah,
Be it the false friends, be it the prepositions that we need to use, be it just literature as well, and of course the many, many switches from conditional praeteritum,
yes.
all that fun stuff. Like I still practice my praeteritum whenever I'm like bored at work because it's just so important. Because so much of German literature is written that way.
Got it.
It's so key to recognize that. And then I'm going to say Italian afterwards, actually, which I know is a very bit surprising to people because a lot of people have Italian roots, they hear it at home. But the tricky thing about Italian is that the standard Italian dialect that we're taught and that is taught is actually just Tuscan. It's the Tuscan dialect of Italy.
What is Tuscan? Is it?
So Tuscany, the region of Italy,
Oh, got it.
yep, it was mutually agreed upon between the North and the South during their unification that Tuscan would be their language of choice
Mm-hmm.
versus every other dialect that Italy offers. And again, including parts of Italy that don't speak Italian as the first language. But a lot of, for example, Italian Americans come from southern Italy who speak Sicilian or Napolitan. And that's why, for example, you hear the difference between, for example, mozzarella or mozzarella, gabagool, capicola. So
Oh,
they're not incorrect. It's just
But
their
it's just different
it's just their dialect is saying
different
things
dialects of
exactly
the.
versus standard.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's reiterate here. So we got the top one is Chinese.
Yes,
Then you said Arabic.
Arabic. Yep, yep.
Then you said German.
German for its many difficulties.
Yep, yeah. Especially in sentence structure. I try to uh do Duolingo on
Mhm.
German, and I always fail at the der die das, like the article. Always fails. So we got German.
Yep,
The next one is Italian.
yep.
What's the next one
Ooh,
here?
I forgot about Japanese. Actually, I'm so sorry.
Where do you rank Japanese at?
Japanese, I would say either tied with Arabic or just in between, or maybe even above it. I would say it, but
Is it
around
because
there.
of the character? Because the pronunciation is pretty.
Oh, you're correct. The neat thing about actually Arabic and Japanese kind of go back to that. Once you hear it pronounced once, that's exactly how it's pronounced.
Mm,
There's no accent changes like Chinese has, for example. It's exactly as written.
mm,
Unlike French, unlike English, for
yeah,
example, which have
the romantic.
interesting pronunciations. The thing about Japanese though is that not only so yes, the speaking part is very easy, very straightforward. Once you master the sounds, yeah, absolutely.
Yep,
The writing,
yep,
because Japanese is one of the very few languages that uses three writing systems at the
yes.
exact same time, and it's very normal to have a sentence with hiragana, which is the indigenous Japanese language, katakana, an alphabet just for foreign words and loan words, and then kanji,
Yep.
all used interchangeably in
So it could
sentence.
be used in the same
Well,
newspaper, right?
well,
Like,
absolutely. Like if you want to say, for example, the German, the German, the German car is over there, for
mm,
example, you would use hiragana as well to describe, oh, it's something's over there. German would be Deutsche, which would be written in katakana, and kuruma for car is written actually in kanji. So that would
wow.
actually be all used at once, and that would be the correct usage of it.
Well, I mean, in hiragana and katakana, there's, I think, 140 like total characters,
Don't take,
roughly.
don't please don't claim this is fact right now, but that would not surprise me if that were the case. Yes,
But kanji, well, my point is the next one here in kanji have like,
thousands.
yeah,
Yeah,
unlimited.
thousands. And that's why Japanese can be a little bit discouraging to some speakers because that they feel like they're not learning enough kanji, that they won't understand enough. And it's yes, like there are some you will hit a point like, hey, I don't know this one. This one's way too complicated for me,
Mm-hmm,
and you'll hit that point. That's totally okay.
mm-hmm.
There are many powerful tools we have online, like for example, G-Show for Japanese that will put this kanji blurb, if you will, into hiragana so you can understand it, you can read it,
Got it.
and then you'll learn.
Got it.
And I think that's going back to kind of
The
difficult.
list.
Like,
Yep.
let's start hitting roadblocks in all these languages that kind
Mm-hmm.
of make them more difficult. For example, like in Arabic, one common misconception that we have when we were learning it is that you actually learn something called modern standard Arabic,
Okay.
which technically nobody speaks. Now, I'm not just saying, well, why are we teaching this? Because modern standard is giving you the groundwork foundation to learn other dialects,
In Arabic.
which are actually spoken. Yes, that's how Arabic is taught, at least here in the United States and the West. And however, for example, if you want to learn just Egyptian Arabic, there are courses for that as well, or Levantine Arabic called Shami, or other things too. So it'd be really, I think that can be kind of a tricky thing about learning that. And as for Chinese, it's just you have to constantly keep learning and memorizing and attaining all these characters to really have a solid backbone in Chinese.
Wow.
And I've had the pleasure of these pleasures I'll call them in learning these languages, and it's something that makes each language challenging in my opinion. But it's definitely a rewarding challenge, of course.
So what's the next one after?
So we had
Italian, right?
yeah, so we had German, then we had Italian, then I'm gonna have to say French
French.
because French. The thing that makes French so complicated is that it's not like phonetic like other Latin languages. The only one that's not phonetic is actually also Portuguese.
Mm,
Portuguese is not written exactly how it sounds. By the way, they have the Portuguese and French underwent something called nasalization, where they kind of skip letters. So
interesting.
yeah, that's why French can be. That's why you see French written with like 70 million vowels,
Mm.
and only two of them are pronounced.
Do
Like
you
for
have an
example,
example?
I do actually. The bird for French is oiseau, and oiseau is not spelled how it sounds to us in English, of course, but in French it's Oiseau. So it's a lot of vowels.
That's a lot of vowels.
Yeah, it really is. But you only heard like two when I said it.
Say it one
So
more time.
oiseau.
Wuzzle.
Yep, that's a bird.
It sounds like a W then.
Well, because the OI sound makes that wa sound.
Wow.
Yep. So it's very tricky, but especially regarding pronunciation in French. But I feel like once you overcome that hurdle of pronunciation, this is, I believe, with that kind of that break the ice moment. Like you have to make that mistake in order to properly understand how French sounds work. Then you're allowed to kind of excel and like, okay, there's so many resources available in French. We mean Canada's right up there. Quebec is what, 7 hour drive from us.
Yes.
So again, you have all those resources at your disposal, and from there you can kind of really hit the ball running.
Got it.
And lastly, I am going to put Spanish. I'm not saying that Spanish is an easy language, not at all. But
That's just compared to the other
correct. But I'm
ones.
just saying in terms of acquisition, you have, especially here in the United States, we have so many resources available for Spanish.
Yep.
That it's pretty much at your disposable. Sorry, not disposable. At your disposal. Excuse me, Jesus.
Disposable.
Yes,
disposable language.
Disposable language. But yeah, but we have so many resources available here in Spanish. In fact, we have more Spanish speakers here
Yes.
than in Spain itself. So if you really want to learn Spanish living in the United States, the resources are 100% there at your disposal.
Well, and it's also we're at the border with Mexico too.
Of course,
I mean, if you go to California, most of the names, like the cities' names, are
Oh.
somewhat in Spanish.
That's history.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a different topic. You know how much I love that, but different topic. And but yeah, you have so many just available resources. Again, you hear Spanish so much in the United States. Even Telemundo is free.
Mm.
And you get on the basic TV package. So if you really want to immerse yourself that way, you absolutely can.
Got it. Is that all the languages we have so far? So let's just reiterate the list.
Yep.
So we got Chinese at the top,
Yep.
then Arabic/Japanese.
Yep.
Then you got German. Then you have Italian.
Yep.
Then you have French, and you have Spanish. Is that everything? That
would be everything I took at Abington. Yes. Yes, that would be everything. And I just, it was a privilege really to learn all of them into, I had amazing, we had amazing teachers. We had, people were very helpful, people who actually were native speakers of the language who I did reach out to when I needed help were always there to help me out. And that was really,
that's awesome.
It was a very, very good time. And truthfully, I wish things worked out where I could just keep studying them, but hey, c'est la vie, as our French friends would say.
So how does your mind work when you're learning all these languages? Do you think in different languages on every hour of the day?
Oh no!
Like, what are your what are your thought process? If I'm David, right? I'm walking around the park, and then I'm looking at stuff and thinking about stuff, and I have a million thoughts that's going through my brain. What language do they speak to you? Is it still in English?
For the most part, yes, I will admit. But once in a while, like out of my curiosity, I'm like, hey, how would this sound in German? How would I approach this in German or in French or in Italian? And then it will start coming to me. Then I'll continue. And I will admit, at work, sometimes if I'm like stuck in German and somebody talks to me, I'll say, yeah, wie geht es? Like, oh, right, hold up now. And then that happened with my manager once, and thankfully he actually did speak German. He was just like, okay, I get it, David. You know German. That did happen once, and but eventually, like, you will get more and more thinking into it. Eventually, to the point where you will start thinking in that language. Eventually, it's not gonna happen overnight. I know a lot of language teachers say, "Hey, you gotta start thinking in this language," but that's like a really complicated step. Because I think for the most part, you're still taking your target language and translating it into your native language for most of the time, especially in the beginning. But as you get more advanced, you will start thinking in that language, at least a little bit, not a lot, but gradually. Because again, nothing happens overnight, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have the same issues too. Sometimes because I know multiple languages as well. Sometimes I know a word in a certain language, but then I couldn't really explain in another language.
I actually get exactly what you're saying because the English language is about 300,000 words, I think, give or take. German has 4. So you can be a little bit more expressive with yourself in German. Like there are some, come on, you and I both know, for example, denken, nachdenken, über nachdenken. They all have different meanings to us. And I can say in German that hey, if you say in German, you say in English, man, I really thought about that. German has multiple ways to express that to what degree of thinking you were doing, you know? Which to me is very remarkable and then allows more fluidity in the language and how you perceive things and how you want to write about things or express yourself, which I think makes language more beautiful. And even languages that, for example, have less words than the language that for example, you can still express yourself very well, even with the less words in the language. What's
For
that?
do you have an example for that?
Well, I think I think something that I always find very interesting about languages that have less words than your native language are that you can that the expression can be so simplified, get the point across just as fast.
Mm,
I'm kind of going a little off on a little bit of a tangent here. Is that the reason why, for example, some people say, "Oh, Spanish speakers speak so fast," because the Spanish language, for one thing, it's a subject drop language, meaning you don't necessarily need to say "yo" every single time,
got it.
or "to," or
It is
"l," or
soy or estoy.
you don't. It's understood just from the verb.
Right.
And Japanese actually is the fastest language in terms of information exchanged per minute. So, for example, let's say for this example, you ask me, hey, how you doing? I say, oh, I'm doing really good. Days, it's weather night. It's weather's out. Sorry, weather's out. The weather outside is really nice. And however, in Japanese, I can just say genki desu, oh genki desu, and that's
Mm,
complete sentence is done. And you know exactly how I'm doing. And I just made a comment about the weather. So, boom, we got that out the way. That was. I know I speak fast. I know that,
it's okay.
but you can see that, like, again, the time spent to explain that is really quick. Versus in German, it takes a little bit more time, a lot more time, I should say, to express the exact same thing.
Mm,
And again, to me, it's just like it's fascinating how each language perceives this information and how they express it so either quickly or slowly. Like, for example, one thing that I know you and I both hate from German, when they have the prefix, they take it all the way to the very end of the
yep, yep,
sentence.
yep. You got to wait for that last
Yeah,
word.
exactly, exactly. The last little preposition or entire words. That's true. But I think that's the kind of a beauty of it.
Mm,
And the thing that really excites me about is that, like, the thought process of how, for example, Germanics thought, or how the Japanese perceive things, or how the Chinese, or how the Semitic, in terms of Arabic, also perceive things and express the information is really fascinating because it really opens up all these new avenues of how to perceive information, analyze it, problem solve. It's a very, very useful tool, I'd say.
got it. Now, when you're learning this language, obviously you get bogged down into the cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Which culture do you find more intriguing? Which culture have shocked you in a way? And can you tell us like example of what are the things that you find interesting about these cultures?
Well, it's a very loaded question, my man. Thing is that each language has its own very, very rich culture. I do not want to diminish any one of them. I can't just like say, oh, here's like a top 10 ranking of all, like, no, I can't, you can't do that. And I really enjoyed, for example, how each culture has something unique to offer you, some new, perception of things, for example, like little nooks and crannies, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, in Italian, you need to use, for example, a definite in an article with, for example, a thing like a noun, like saying if you want to say this is my car,
Mm-hmm.
you have to use, for example, la mia macchina. You have to use that. However, if it's a relative, a blood relative, especially like in family,
Mm-hmm.
for example, we'll talk about, oh, this is my fiance, mia moglie. It's not implied. You don't need to say la mia moglie. It's redundant. You just kind
Mm-hmm.
of show that familial bond. It's very. I really like that a lot. How that's like so family based that you can just kind of you don't need to use a definite article to say this is mine or this is my family. It's just
Mm.
implied. And Chinese actually has the same thing, believe it or not, where you don't need to say, for example, this is my father, this is my mother. You just say wo baba, wo
Well,
mama.
Papa.
Yep, that you say that's my dad or that's your dad.
Mm.
Conversely, that's their dad.
Yeah. So
It's
different
understood.
languages have
Similar things,
yeah,
yes.
how you say things depends on the person that you're talking to or
And their
about the person that
yep,
you're talking
and their
to.
relation to you, of course. And the Japanese, for example, has separate words for what you say for your parents versus what a stranger would call your parents.
Mm.
For example, like every Japanese to know chichi and haha for father and mother. However, oto-san,
Otosan,
okasan,
okasan.
if
Yeah.
you're talking to someone else's.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very interesting that all these languages have that in common,
Mm-hmm.
except for German.
it's,
But
it's just the dirty dust at this point
yeah,
and
exactly.
genitive.
Yes, exactly. But it's very interesting how all these languages have that in common with each other.
Mm,
That based on these relations, that okay, yeah, there's a certain value here that's really important, and that's really awesome, actually.
yeah. Well, these come from traditional sense too. I mean,
Hmm.
yesterday, maybe, yeah, or 2 days ago, I was learning Vietnamese,
Hmm.
and one of the things that I was looking up on Duolingo
Hmm.
was say I am, like uh, "tôi là," right? "Tôi là" is how you say I am. But then when you're speaking to a older folk, and my girlfriend was telling me this, it's like
Mhm.
con la. So
Mm,
there's that respectful and traditional
of
way
course.
of how to say things, and I find it in English we don't have that.
We used
Maybe
to. I
we used
mean,
to,
we
yeah.
used to a very long time ago, back when English was more like a Germanic language.
Mm.
Well, it used to be a lot more complicated too. We used to have cases, declination, gender, just like German has
Ah.
today. But English language is something that's very fascinating, like to study,
Mm-hmm.
because of how much it's changed over its, excuse me, millennia of history.
So why did it change?
Oh, geez. Okay. So there are like a few key points in the history. Well, here's the thing: English, of course, comes from England. We kind of got to go across the pond a little bit and just talk about English language history. There are a few critical moments that kind of shapes the modern English language as we know it. So, first one is the arrival of the Romans, as they brought the Latin language into into Great Britain. This happened about, excuse me, first century.
Mm-hmm.
So the Romans arrived, built London, and the suddenly Londinium, and there you go. There's the Gallo Latin language that was also similarly spoken in French, because the French they used to be the Celts,
Mm-hmm.
and again they also got Latinized as well, which would eventually become the French language.
Got it.
But of course, the Gallo Briton language emerged as a completely separate language as well. However, there are also holdouts, for example, of Celtic languages that were existed in Scotland and in Ireland because the Romans never conquered them.
Got it.
So they remained distinct. So as the time went on, and of course as the Roman Empire fell in about the 5th century, and the last legions left Britain, they were kind of there to fend for themselves, and the language remained a little bit isolated. Then come the 6th century, and then all of a sudden you have the arrival of the Anglo-Saxon tribes. Of course, this name sound a little bit familiar because they of course came from German,
Right.
and the German tribes came to England, and well, for one thing, they conquered, and then they mixed with the population. So a lot of the Latin words that exist in English, mostly for law and for religion,
Mm-hmm.
come from that time. However, a lot of German words and a lot of German grammar came from the Anglo-Saxon tribes that came
Mm.
and mixed with the British population to create a kind of proto-English that existed. Now, the most drastic change in the English language came actually in the 11th century when William the Conqueror, or the Bastard, however you want to call him. Now that he was, I'm serious. When he came and conquered England. Now, William the Conqueror came from Normandy, which were Frankified Vikings who lived in Normandy, France. They spoke a early version of French. When they came, it was the most drastic transformation of England by any conqueror, because they completely imposed their way of life, their language, their customs, their rules onto the English people. So that is actually so because of William the Conqueror and the linguistic changes that happened in the English language. This essentially allowed English to become or it's like the early modern
The
English right
modern
here.
English
Mm-hmm.
now.
And of course, then we have Shakespeare who added a whole bunch of new stuff in language, and then of course, everything else that happened in history. But those are the three main key turning points in English language's development: the Romans, the Anglo Saxons, and William the Conqueror. And actually, the thing is, though, is that you can kind of still tell the difference. For example, let me ask you this in German: how do you say a house?
House.
Exactly. What's a really large house?
Große House.
No, no, not in German. I'm sorry. Like in English, like a really like large house.
Mansion.
Exactly. The word in French for house is maison.
Mm.
See, and here's the other thing. It's also kind of a food thing. Also, I love food. So,
We
for
all do.
example, exactly. So here's the thing. So, like for example, like the Anglo-Saxon peasant would work with a cow, and cow in German is of course Kuh. However, when you cook the cow, it becomes beef,
Beef.
bœuf in French. As another
But
example,
buff
bœuf,
is
beef.
cow,
No,
or
no,
is it
beef,
like beef?
beef.
Okay, it's the same as beef.
Basically, like we kind of just loan those words into the English language to make it more refined.
Mm.
And it's very interesting to me how these little linguistic changes came from. Because you're correct, we can speak more, basic levels, but we also have so many French loan words in English. And even this is also why when people are learning English, they struggle so much because it's not written as it's pronounced. It's not like phonetic
Mm.
like German is, for example,
Mm-hmm.
because this is the French influence right here. Like through, thorough, though.
Mm.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
The UGH, you know
Yeah,
what I
no,
mean?
UGH, yep.
Yep, which is like, huh? How do you pronounce that?
Ugh.
Exactly. And I think that's one just fascinating thing about a language's development and how it, you
Yeah,
know, grew,
from being conquered,
Mhm.
from someone just taking over and changing the
Oh yeah,
language.
and that's essentially how the English language came. Well, this early modern form. Of course, English then,
Wow.
of course, continued to change. Shakespeare was a huge influence on the English language and how it's had so many added additional new words. Then of course we get once the British started conquering the whole world,
Yeah,
we had so many additional new words put into the English language, and then we have, of course, modern English.
got it. So where do you think language come from? Because uh, did from a biblical sense, we have like the Adam and Eve, right?
Mhm.
Starting out and whatever English that they spoke. But then how does I don't know if you know this, like, but how does we start having different languages? Why can't the
Hmm.
entire world speak one language and we'll be communicating properly throughout the entire world? Why do we have different languages?
Oh, I think that's more of a geography question, more so than anything. Because I believe when people have found like what when I say like borders, I don't mean like soft borders, like that we just drew on the lines. Like, oh, for example, oh, here's America, here's Canada. Because when you go up to the border, there's no real, the only real hard border between the U.S. and Canada is, for example, the St. Lawrence River,
Hmm.
and Mexico, it's the Rio Grande River. You have those hard, distinct borders right there. Versus arbitrarily, like, oh, this forest is our border, for example.
Yep.
When you have like a mountain border, for example, like, and I'll use, for example, Georgian or Armenian or Albanian. These are, or Basque, even the Basque language too. These are languages that are geographically isolated from their neighbors. That trade is a bit hard. It's very hard to go there.
Yep.
Back in ancient times, of course, and these languages developed independently of all their neighbors. So that's why, even though they share such close proximity to each other, linguistically, it's hard to understand each other.
Mm.
And I think, for example, like I also like I'm studying history. I promise I won't talk about this for too long, but recently I found myself really enjoying history of India and how India developed. And India is, of course, a huge, diverse place.
Sure.
In fact, the northern Indian languages are actually, they belong in the Indo-European family, meaning they have something similar with German, English, Russian, Persian,
Got it.
Italian, Spanish, subject to verb agreement. That's the only thing in common.
Hmm.
But um, then when you get in the south, you have the Dravidian language. And because of the Deccan Plateau that kind of was served as a hard border, that's why these languages are so distinctly different from each other.
Hmm.
Which I think is a great example of how that more so geography than anything will shape a language's development in relation with their
Their
neighbors.
neighbors.
Hmm.
Got it.
Yep.
So going back now to learning the
Hmm.
language, how does learning a language help you in your daily life? Because now that you're learning, well, no, not that you're learning, but you know how to learn
Hmm.
a single topic, whether that's be languages or any other aspects that you're learning right now or cultures. How does that help you in your daily life now?
Well, I'd say it makes me more extroverted more so than anything because like
Really?
I'm more like willing to go out there and say hey, how you doing, just like even more so at work in my professional environment. Like once they put me in sales, I like you kind of have to go talk to the customer,
Mm.
not the cold calling way, but occasionally. And then you kind of have to go out there and say, hey, how you doing, can I help you, with something? And that really gave me that boost that like, hey, it's okay, you got to do it.
Yep.
And even like when I'm like like actually learning stuff, like my acquisition of it is a little bit different because now I'm just like, hey, I can take this works with that, then I start linking all things together, and then I put them in a group.
Yep.
And that way I'm like, hey, all these things have this in common because, for example, let's take flooring, these things, all these products take underlayment,
Mm.
these ones don't. There's a hard
Mm.
distinction right there. I can worry about these later, and get the ball rolling from there, so to speak.
Well, it seems like you understand the foundation of it and then just work yourself through
Oh yeah,
the many layers of whatever topic that you
build the cake. Yep,
exactly,
yep.
exactly. And I think when it comes to learning, when we're going to school, we don't really know how to learn. We were told what to learn, but then we don't know how to, except that read this book, read this chapter, takes this test. And we both grew up in the American style, and I think
Mhm.
it's more practical. When I was studying in German, it's more theoretical.
Which is a very big distinction between our education system and pretty much any other European education system. That, like, you need a theory. Yes, here are the facts. Now, what can you do with it?
Mm,
Now it's kind of like the ball's kind of in your court now.
hmm.
It's like, for example, like I know in the Italian education system, they're very based on oral exams.
Oral exam. Interesting.
Basically, that like it's not so much like a written test, but like an oral exam of, hey, explain to me everything that you learned. For example, like one of my friends who did a study abroad in Italy, they did their final in the geography course. For example, they had like a giant map of the world out, and they said, "Hey, explain to me this and migration patterns and all this and that," and then like conceptualize like, "Hey, what's the so what of this?"
Hmm.
Not just, "Oh, can you point to this and that?" Because like I know, for example, this was an American test on geography. It'd be like, "Hey, here's this country. What country is this? What river is this? What mountain is this? Check, done." In my opinion, you just memorized, crammed a bunch of facts into your head, and they'll go out the window in like 2 minutes.
Right.
Versus in Germany or in Italy or in France, it stays with you. Like because
Mm.
you had to think about it, you had to process it, you had to say, "What's the so what of this?" Which I think is which is much more better, which is better in
Well,
learning sense.
yeah, I mean, I agree. One, I think one of the ways to learn is to teach other people what you have learned. That's still a method of
Oh
learning.
yeah,
And there's I kind of listened to a podcast about this. I think it was Naval Ravikant, and it's one thing to know something, but it's another to understand it. Like
completely.
completely, like you could, well, not know it, but more memorize it.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, I could memorize, the 50 states in an entire, United States,
Yeah, of
but then
course.
do you really know what each states, if let's say you travel to each one and
Hmm.
talk about a certain thing or two about each state? So, what are your thoughts on that one?
I think you're right. Like most of our education is now centered around memorization, which I think it really should not be. Because like yes, if you and me, for example, we can memorize absolutely everything about God, pick a book they made us read in high school, in English class, but we won't really get the so what of it.
Mm,
And we'll just, forget about it the second we're done. Versus, hey, here's, for example, in Japanese or German or French, here's a topic.
mm,
Read about it, learn about it. Then I'm going to ask you about it. But I'm not going to ask all the same questions about it. Like, I think even our own German professor, he tried that with us a little bit of, hey, here's a topic. Go figure it out about it, practice it. Then we'll come back and then I want you to make your own sentences. They don't need to be super complex. Just make a sentence. And I think that was the best approach we could have
yeah, because you're adding a little bit of creativity into
had.
it. I
Yep.
think when you have this practical sense of learning, you just copy and paste what it says in a book or what other people have said,
Hmm.
or maybe things that you find in Quizlet.
Yep. Quizlet especially.
So when you have this theoretical type of studying, then you make up the things that you have learned and then start making things on your own. I think in life is the same way.
Oh yeah.
One thing that, same thing with language, right? This
Hmm.
is where I'm trying to get at is one, you have a goal.
Of course.
And then two, you start building the foundation.
Hmm.
Same thing in any industry, right? You start learning the basics. I come from a real estate background, so you start learning about what type of houses or how does a house built,
Hmm.
and then afterwards, then you start executing and understanding. Build maybe you start building stuff, or
Hmm.
maybe now you're creating your own sentence structure, or maybe you're learning a different dialects.
Hmm.
And I think in life that's
Yeah.
very important. You learn things and then eventually you start doing it and you start implementing things. I think that cutoff is where people get stuck. It's like, I want to learn, I want to keep on learning, but you're not executing on whatever that is that you're learning.
That's actually exactly what our German professor told me because he told me that so many kids in the U.S. take Spanish in school, and millions do.
Hmm.
But because they don't use it, they don't go off what they've learned. It just withers away. And
Yes.
it's like I was like, oh yeah, I took Spanish in school, and it's whatever. But you're missing out on so much. You know what I mean? And I feel like the practicality of actually, as you said, literally building the house of literally going to go out and speak the language beyond what you learned, stumble through it, make your mistakes. I mean, I'm sure even building that's happened. I'm sure. And hey, even on my side of things too, 100% yes, it happens all the time, and you have to keep going because
Yes.
that's, I guess, the human experience. I guess, or
Well, making mistakes is still part of the process. I
of
think many
course.
people are just afraid of making mistakes and they get stuck in this, paralysis analysis
Hmm.
of, okay, let's keep going. Let's research more.
Hmm.
But you're not going anywhere. You feel like you're going somewhere. You feel that you're productive, but at the end of the day, now it's based on results, not necessarily based on what the things that you have learned.
Oh yeah. And I feel like with language, like you have more, you can tell when you've like, when you sample, like when you've made a mistake, how to overcome it, why that mistake happened, and then, for example, how to make sure it doesn't happen again. Like you have that
Mm,
process there. For example, I feel like in German, for example, everybody gets confused on gender. And when
mm,
you have a preposition, for the English speakers who don't know what we're talking about, it's like, for example, in, out, about, for, those kind of things between. And in German, they have to be matched with a certain case.
Yes.
In English, this doesn't exist anymore. It's just saying, for whom is this? And yes, that's the correct usage of it. We've been over this a million times in German class. You remember this. Not who's this for whom is this? But the thing is, though, is that you need to make those mistakes to learn.
Sure.
And I still find it kind of ironic that I learned more about English grammar from my German class than I did from any English course. I mean, would you say that's true, though?
Yes.
Especially with our teacher.
Yeah, he was very rough on us.
Yeah. But hey, worth it.
So what are some key takeaways here that you want other people to learn when they want to learn a language? Besides the basics that we talked about, let's say I want to learn maybe Spanish or something. Should I start at Duolingo? Should I go on Babbel? Should I go Rosetta Stone? Like, what do you recommend for people to start learning languages?
I think Duolingo is a great free resource that we have. It's an amazing thing that anyone can get. But one thing is that I've noticed that a lot of people just kind of, as you say, they don't go out of it. They just do it, kind of like a check mark, and then they're done.
Mm,
As we said earlier, like you need to go off of it. Like you need to get outside the box. You need to take the vocab you learned. Like during the pandemic, I actually worked as a tutor. I tutored kids. I tutored college kids. It was great. And I had one kid who kind of self-taught himself Japanese.
mm,
So he did just have Duolingo. Was all possible, and he wrote down everything he learned, and then he reworded things to kind of get the correct sentence structure. And then I was like, okay, this is really impressive here because this is exactly what, in my opinion, what you're supposed to do with Duolingo. It's a free resource, yes, but you need to go outside. You need to kind of break the sound barrier, so to speak. You know what I mean? Break that barrier, and then you can really maximize using Duolingo.
got it. So use a tool, but then learn by yourself outside of that, immersing yourself.
Have like a notepad out, jot some things down, and then just keep using those, and then keep building on that. So eventually, you will actually get somewhere with Duolingo. It's possible. It's completely possible. Anything's possible.
So how do you stay motivated during this learning process?
I would say motivation is that, just like with anything, you need to set realistic goals for yourself.
Mm,
Yes, you want to be fluent. Yes, you want to be able to go, read this book in this language. Of course, that's great, but we need to start being realistic here. Like, hey, you're not going to be fluent in 6 months. I know there's so many videos on YouTube that it's like, oh, I learned Chinese in 6 months and stunned locals. Like, no, that's just like, in my opinion, that's to an extent, yes, that is valid, but it's just for like shock value. You know what I mean? It's just like, hey, I did this impossibly hard thing and it was easy. Like, you know what I mean? But what I think more so is that to stay motivated, you just have realistic goals for yourself and say, hey, I did this. That's step one done. What's step two? Again, there has to be a game plan there.
mm-hmm.
Again, you can't just say, hey, I want to build a house. I
Right.
say, hey, foundations, walls, electrician, plumbing, you need all that stuff there as well. Then you can talk about furniture and aesthetic and all that.
Got it.
And
So breaking things down.
of course, yeah, because again, like, it's a lot to want to say, hey, I want to be fluent in a language, because what avenue will you take? How you achieve that goal? Of course, there's not just one way to fluency. There's like multiple ways that sometimes intersect, sometimes they're parallel, and you kind of need to just kind of go for the ride, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that seems it's like running, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's not that I want to do a marathon in 2 weeks, for example. No, you need to break it down.
Of course.
Or not 2 weeks. Maybe that's a little exaggerated.
That's
Maybe that's a
very exaggerated.
little bit way too motivational there. Maybe in 6 months, right? I want
Yeah.
to do a marathon in 6 months, but that might be a little bit too overwhelming for someone, right? So you start breaking things down. Okay, maybe I'll run a few miles tomorrow.
Exactly.
Maybe I'll just put on my shoes today. And then you put on 5 miles, then 10 miles, and eventually you reach that certain point. And I think in language learning, it's the same thing. It's maybe fluent is way too overarching of a goal, but okay, let's get the foundations first. Let's have a basic conversations by
Exactly.
week 1, and then week 2, numbers from 1 to 100, and
There you
then
go.
week 3, you start breaking down, and you have these little goals, and eventually, these continuous process and these continuous disciplines that you do on a daily basis becomes into a fruition. Hence the name. My podcast name is Kaizen, and it's continuous improvement, right? So I think that is important for. And generally anything in life, what you do on a daily basis can become in fruition and it become your goal right?
Absolutely.
So, in terms of goal, I want to switch gears here.
Mhm.
So, what's the end goal for you? You know thousands of languages, you
Okay,
know
hold
so
on
much
now. Hold on now.
cultures.
Hold on
What
now.
is the end goal for David here?
Well, the thing is, though, is that at first I really wanted to become a language teacher, just like our German professor. But after getting into the education field, I was like, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me.
Mm,
And because you're right, like most of the kids I was working with, was like, hey, I'm taking French. I just need that check mark. I don't care about French culture. I don't care about this and that. I just want the check mark. That I
mm,
got my A minus and I'm done.
mhm.
And I completely get that too.
All right, David, what is the end goal for you? Learning all these languages, understanding these cultures, what's in it for you?
Well, life is not exactly a straight road, as you and I both know. And at first, I thought, hey, I'll become a language teacher. I thought it'd be really cool to have a history teacher or a language teacher who knows, all these languages, can pronounce all these cool things, and like really, one thing I loved about our old classes was how our professor could just segment into pretty much anything.
Mm.
It was a good excuse to with language. You could talk about anything. And I said, hey, you know what? I want to do that too. Sure, unfortunately, the pandemic might not have been the best time for that due to all the hardships going on. And I said, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me. I take a step back and reevaluate. And now I decided that, you know what? I do want to go to grad school. I do want to go study international relations. I think that's a great combination of everything I've been studying so much, plus economics, which I got to learn, but hey, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And
Very important.
and yeah, that's the next goal is to get into international relations and hopefully work in DC and maybe just maybe try to make the world a little better place a little bit.
Got it. And
That's the
what made you into United Nations? Is it because it's where
oh not
everyone
the
have different languages
oh not
or
the oh not the UN. I'm kind of more thinking about like DC, like government stuff.
government
I think
stuff?
that would be the goal in my opinion.
Got it. In our podcast, we ask the same questions
Mhm.
at the end for many of our guests, and that is, what is one thing that you do on a daily basis that help you in your life that that other people can benefit from?
Well, one thing that I do is that you can like I said earlier, like, I love, for example, German. I love French. I love Italian. I love, reviewing bits of other languages I've learned too. Is that you just got to find the time for it, and then it's kind of like a reward for yourself. Like, hey, I just clocked out. How can I reward myself for this day? And building, like, example, listening to a German podcast, for example, like Tagesschau,
Mm,
or listening to some French music, or just something that's in what I love is the best thing. And I'm still learning, and it's really just rewarding. And I feel like that's something that I do in my time that maybe someone else, maybe who's not even doing languages or not even doing real estate, just like find that little time to do what you love. It's just so much better for you. And be it educational, be it a hobby, I feel like that is something that everybody, in my opinion, needs.
so how do you know if it's something that you love,
Well,
or how can you find it?
oh, that's a good question. Well, here's the thing: you got to try a lot of things. Then you know what I mean. Like for me, like I'm like a lot of kids have like a favorite subject in school. For me, it was like history, languages. I think, as you noticed. What was yours?
What is?
Your favorite subjects back in school, if you remember.
My favorite subject, it was definitely sociology or
Nice.
psychology. Just learning how people interact with each other,
Mhm.
communicate with each other, and understanding why we are doing the things that we are doing.
So, like, finding something relating to sociology or psychology, maybe reading a book relating to those topics, or a podcast, or just some kind of information, or maybe even something fun and entertaining with it.
Mm,
I think that would be a great constant self improvement. Maybe it's not like a grade. Maybe it's not like in the traditional, like, oh, you have a grade, you achieve this milestone, but more so like, hey, I did this for myself, and this is what I love. I
mm.
feel like over the years, we've all come across something, be it maybe it's something from school, maybe it's something from sports, maybe it's a hobby you like, but just find that time for you, and to do that speaks volumes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in today's world, we are so bogged down into our day-to-day work life
Hmm.
and maybe our family and our kids that we don't have time for ourselves. I think the time for ourselves is very important. Doing the things that we enjoy, whether that's hobbies, reading, or any type of activities, just for ourselves is truly important.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a great way to wrap it, actually.
Yeah, awesome. Well, any parting words where people can find you?
Well, I don't have a website, fortunately, but hey, you found me on LinkedIn earlier, so I'm there. Yeah, and again, if anybody has any language learning questions, I'd be happy to help get them started or see what I can do with them.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, man.
Awesome. I'll see you on the next one.